I have met all of Billy Graham's children, and they're all so incredibly different. But the one that I've taken a shine to is Ruth Graham. I don't know why exactly, but I feel as though I've known her my whole life. And I recently invited her to my home to talk about life, lessons, and her father. A conversation with Ruth Graham.
This is the Glenn Beck Program.
I don't know even where to begin. I want to know about your dad. I want to know about growing up in a famous family like that. But I think I want to know, I want the audience to know you first. We have become friends over 2 years?
Since you went to visit my father.
Yeah, and we have I don't know if this is fair to describe it this way, an odd friendship, because I feel like I've known you forever, and I have been wowed by your kindness.
Aww.
You remind me of your father.
Thank you, thank you.
Are you more your mother, more your father?
I'm more my father, yes. I've been told by people who work for both for me and my father, that they said that I'm more like my father.
Your father was always so kind to me, and I was told that your mom and your dad would sometimes disagree on scriptures. And she would say, "You're wrong, Billy," and sit down and here's what it is. And I don't know, because I only know the later years, Billy Graham, and but he seems so soft and so gentle, firm, but soft and gentle. And just based on only that one story, they had they each brought an important piece.
They did.
To the relationship.
My mother was a character. My mother was a very strong-willed character. She absolutely adored him, and he adored her. And I have written of him that I'm much more warmed by the embers than I ever was by the fire. There's a gentleness about my father now that you're picking up that he may not have had in the early years, but
when do you say early years? What do you mean?
Well, when I was growing up, when
okay.
When he was in his 30s, 40s,
okay.
And he was so preoccupied and so busy that we didn't have much time with him. So he was always had an agenda, had to get through to something, and so I have enjoyed this time when he's at home and the gentleness, and as I've gone through my own issues in life, how kind he has been to me, how gracious he has been to me. He could have said, "Ruth, I'm tired of fooling with you. You're on your own." But he didn't. He just loved me. And I think each one of his children knows that they are unconditionally loved.
He is, he could have said that to really pretty much all of you.
That's right.
Because, Franklin told me the stories of your mom crawling across the roof, going to the window because he had locked her out. I mean, you all went through a difficult time. Tell me what it was like to be not just a preacher's daughter, but Billy Graham's daughter.
Well, Glenn, Mother and Daddy were very wise. They put us in a little town, hamlet really, that was populated by retired missionaries and retired pastors. So when they saw little Grahams misbehaving, they didn't gossip about us, they prayed for us. And they didn't, because it was usual for them to be traveling the globe preaching the gospel, it was not unusual that Daddy did the same thing. So we were not aware of Daddy's fame and we knew what he was doing. Our Sunday lunches were always talking about lives that had been changed through his ministry. And we would gather around the radio to listen to the Hour of Decision, which originated wherever Daddy was, whether he was in India or Africa or Australia. And we were part of his ministry in that way. But we didn't grow up with the feeling that, well, we're Billy Graham's kids. We were called the preacher's kids.
When did you know? When did you say, my dad's Billy Graham?
I don't know that I've said it yet.
Good for you.
I think that when I was sent away to boarding school, people treated me differently because I was Billy Graham's daughter. But,
in a good way or a bad way?
Well, at the first boarding school, it was wonderful. I was the princess. Right. But the second boarding school, they didn't reject me because of it, but I went to, it was on Long Island, and it was a school for probably troubled girls. It was a Christian school in the fact that the faculty were Christians, but the students weren't. And it was a real eye-opener for me. I had never been in that kind of environment, but it was probably the best year I had because it made me claim my faith as my own. I was no longer my father's faith or my mother's faith. I
would imagine, because I know it with my kids, when my kids meet people, they clam up because they, and I feel it. They're first, oh, what's it like to have? And they're like, it's wonderful. And the second thing is they're expected to know everything about politics, know everything about American history, love George Washington the way I love George Washington, and they're like, no, not really. That's Dad.
That's right.
You, being around a bunch of Christians, you had to have faced people going, oh, you've got to tell me about your testimony. What is it like to be, I mean.
They do ask that, and fortunately God has given me the grace to just be myself. For years, Glenn, I tried to live up to other people's expectations. And it didn't get me very far. And I went into deep depression. And I finally realized, I can't live up to people's expectations. I have an audience of one, and he's the only one that matters. And so that's what I try to do.
Tell me your, because I think people would be, shocked if they don't know you. Graham got divorced? Not just once.
Yes, multiple times.
Multiple times.
Yes.
Tell me about the driving home and seeing Dad and thinking, I don't know if my father's even going to love me. I don't know if how he's going to treat me on this.
Well, I divorced my first husband for years of infidelity, and I knew that was, I was the first one to get a divorce in my family, so that was not good. And he had been a friend of the family. His parents were friends of the family. So that made it very complicated. And I felt like a circle had been drawn, and I was on the outside of the circle. Did
the family know? Because I know you guys went through therapy for a long time, but did the family all know this was going on?
No, I kept it a secret. And in my mind, I thought, oh, they'll be so proud of me when they learn what I've been enduring. That was not a good idea. But because they were not proud of me when they knew what I was enduring. They
were like, why didn't you get out?
No, they were like, why can't you stay? Why can't you deal with this? Why can't you forgive him and just go on? You see, Glenn, in our church, adultery is forgivable, divorce is not. At least it wasn't back then.
That is not right.
No, it wasn't right. It wasn't right. But the enormous amounts of pressure. And so I moved to get away from where we were and moved to a downtown city in the South, which I'd come from a rural area. It was not a good move. I was a fish out of water, and I wanted somebody to take care of me. So immediately they introduced me to a widower, and I fell in love, and within 24 hours I knew I'd made a mistake. And I thought, what am I going to do? And it got so bad that he was threatening violence, and I thought, I'm not going to stick around. So I got in the car and realized I had to go home. But Mother and Daddy had told me not to marry this man. Mother had called from Seattle and said, don't marry him, slow it down. Daddy called me from Tokyo and said, honey, why don't you wait? I figured, they hadn't been single parents. They didn't know what it was like. So being willful, being stubborn, being sinful, I made my own choice. And I married this man on a New Year's Eve and realized that it was bad. After 5 weeks, I fled. And I thought, I've got to go home. I've got to tell Mother and Daddy what's going on. And it was a 2-day drive. And fears multiplied with every mile.
I bet
Questions. What am I going to say to them? What are they going to say to me? What about my children? What kind of example had I been to my children?
Were you worried at all too? I mean, I would imagine, what is this going to do for my dad? His daughter?
Had to be part of the questioning, but at that point I was more concerned about my children.
Good for you.
And my parents. They were not young.
Yeah.
So I drove up, and you've been up to the house, and you know how you wind up at the top, and you pull to where you park, and my father was standing there. And when I got out of the car, he wrapped his arms around me and he said, "Welcome home."
Oh my God.
And there was never any condemnation. And Glenn, that changed my life. That grace changed my life, and it informs what I do today, because I want other people to experience the grace of God like my father gave to me.
My aunt was in a abusive relationship, and my grandfather begged her all the way down the aisle, "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it." And she's like, "Dad, stop it." And he said, "Honey, please, I'm begging you, just turn around right now, come with me out the church." And she said, "Stop it, Dad." And he stopped, and he gave her a kiss, and he whispered in her ear, "You let me know when you're done."
Wow.
And she got married, and then he started beating her. And she would come over, and it tore my grandfather apart. But he couldn't sit and listen to it, and because she would make excuses for him. And he would get up from the table, and he would say, "Joanne, are you done yet?"
No.
And she'd say, "Stop it, Dad. He's just had it, whatever excuse."
All the excuses.
And I've always been so moved by that he was steadfast. He let her make her own decision. And he knows you can't save somebody who doesn't want to be saved. And when she finally came over one day, he opened the door and she ran into his arms and she said, "Dad, I'm done." And he got out his shotgun and went for a visit and never had a problem with him again. But the other part of that story is I'm always amazed on how people, these games in our head that happens, that they just, that we think we have to do something, or we think we deserve it. You know what I mean? And how do you get past that? How do you get past it's me?
Well, it takes a long time, and it takes the truth of the Scriptures. The Scriptures talk about renewing your mind, and you do have to make a conscious effort to renew your mind in what God says about you and not what that person may have said about you. And it takes a long time. And then I turned around and married again, but I married my best friend. And we had wonderful years. I mean, I was truly loved. But after 10 years of marriage, he decided he didn't want to be married anymore. And that truly broke my heart. I apologized to God. I apologized to my first husband. I apologized to everybody. But I was really brokenhearted. And we are still good friends. We still go to the movies together and have dinner together. But and he is really my grandchildren's grandfather. Not literally, but he acts as the grandfather because my first husband died.
You had to have, at some point, either done one of two things. Okay, I'm a bad person. I brought this on because I'm not, or I've lived a good life. I've done everything you're telling me to do. I've done this, and I mean, what's the deal, God? Which one did you do?
A little bit of both. I remember at one point sort of shaking my fist at God and said, "I'm tired of doing it your way. Look where it's gotten me." I was really angry. Well, God didn't let me stay there for too long, and He corrected me. But what I have learned when you make...
Do you go there? Tell me what happened. Tell me, how did he correct? What do you mean by all that?
Well, he let me go my way, and it just got worse and worse. And I thought, I don't want this life. This isn't what I was created to be. So I had to pull back and put it in reverse. And God in His grace allowed, He forgives. He forgives. And it was not easy. It has not been easy. The effect on my children has disturbed me. But they've come through to be wonderful people. You met them.
I love
and
them.
they're just themselves. They're just so cute and fun. And we've built a close-knit, because their father has died, we have built a close-knit family with just the 4 of us.
I sat at your table for your dad's 95th birthday, and I watched, honestly, and I don't mean this, it's not a reflection on you or the family or anything else, but it's Billy Graham's 95th birthday. The circus.
Yes.
I mean, it was, and I said to you, I really wanted to say hi to your dad, but I didn't want to be somebody pushing my way in, and there were so many people there and everything else. And you looked at me at one point, and, because I spent most of the time watching you.
Oh dear. I wish
And
I
I know.
had behaved better.
And you looked at me and you said, do you remember? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What'd you say?
I said, your children hate this as much as I do. And you said yes.
And I don't think this is just about being famous. I think this is really a lot of stuff with dads.
Yes.
I asked you, can you help me with knowing what not to do or to do with my children? Because sometimes you get blindsided. I don't remember what it was last night, not having anything to do with fame. I said something, and my wife looked at me, as always happens, and she's like, you didn't say that to the girls, did you? And I'm like, well, yeah, why? Yeah, no. You know what I mean? And sometimes guys just don't even know what we're doing. Well, what are the things that you would look at and say, gosh, I wish dads would know this, especially busy dads?
Be there.
You believe in quality time?
I do. I do. I think one of the issues that I had, and I've just recently come to understand it, is that with my father gone so much, that as a little girl, I read that as abandonment. He didn't abandon me, and it wasn't his fault, and I'm not being critical.
Yeah.
But I read it as a little girl, that my father's not there, he's abandoned me.
How do you know that?
Well, because of my responses later in life, that I was looking for security. I didn't have a daddy to tuck me in bed at night. I didn't have a daddy to greet me, when I came home from school. I didn't have a daddy who came home every night. But he was gone, and sometimes 6 months at a time. So you build protective mechanisms inside. And I did, and as soon as I had the opportunity, I married a man hoping for security. I did it again, hoping for security. I did it again, hoping for security. And I would have told you, Jesus is my security. Mm-hmm. But the gospel had not gotten deep down in here. So I realized that a friend looked at me and said, you have abandonment issues. And I would have argued with him. But I knew in my spirit he was absolutely right.
What is the difference between everybody's got problems and everybody's got a busy job, and
absolutely, businessmen travel.
How do you?
Doctors are busy.
Where is the line there? What could Dad have done?
I don't know that my father could have done anything differently. God had called him to this ministry. This was what he was to do. It was my response that was sinful. It was my response that was wrong. I was just a little girl looking for her daddy, and when I got older,
would you say that was sinful, or just a little girl who just wanted her dad?
Well, as I got older, it was sinful. I was choosing these men out of my need rather than my attachment or my health. I wasn't a healthy person.
I think the thing that maybe the reason why you and I connect this way we do is because when I sobered up, I had had a mask on my whole life. Because we all are from our childhood. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I was the, hey everybody, everything's great, isn't it? And so we all have a mask, and we all think down inside, it's just me, nobody else can relate to this, nobody else can think this way, I'm all screwed up, I'm whatever, everybody else is perfect, they're expecting me to be perfect. And once you take that mask off and say, look, this is who I am, and you know,
There's freedom there.
There's freedom, you're not afraid anymore, and I think you help so many people by you. It's not a therapy session, but by you saying, yeah, this is me, warts and all.
I'm flawed. And as a matter of fact, anytime I speak, I stand up and say, I'm qualified to speak because I am flawed.
Right.
I'm a sinner.
When did you first say, I want to find God?
I was 7 years old when I wanted Jesus to be my Savior. And that was well and good, and I was baptized. Then when I was 11, my father and I went to a church revival. He was not conducting it, but his friend was, and so we went just to support. And it was in Florida, Fort Pierce, Florida, at the First Baptist Church, and we were wintering in Florida that year. And Daddy decided he was going to go, and I asked if I could just go with him. I wanted to be with my daddy. And so we went, and whenever Daddy went somewhere, you know it, there's a stir. So we sat in the back, and the evangelist gave an invitation for those who wanted to give their hearts to Christ publicly to come forward. And I thought, I want to do that. But then I thought, no, you know, they'll see me and they'll think, you know. And I thought, no, I really want to do this. I want to make a public commitment to Jesus Christ. So I stepped forward and moved down towards the front and bowed my head and could hear shuffling people behind me. And pretty soon I felt a hand on my shoulder. And it was my father's hand. And he who had called millions to make a decision with Christ was standing with his daughter. And so I took a step out, and Daddy stepped with me, which was good, and it's what he should have done. But it touched me deeply. Then, as I told you, when I went to boarding school in New York, I had to really take a stand and claim my faith as my own.
Why?
Because I was out of my element. I was no longer in the cocoon. I was no longer in the nest, and there were people challenging me.
You were at school for wayward girls.
They were wild girls.
Were you wild?
No, are you kidding me?
Okay.
I was afraid to, you know,
right. So
borrow
how did you?
a toothpick.
Right. So how did you end up there? It was just that's where you were going.
Well, this is a sort of a long story, but I had been to school in Florida for 2 years. That was wonderful. I loved it dearly. My other two sisters had gone there, and Mother and Daddy decided they would move me to be closer to Franklin. Franklin was at the Stony Brook School, and they thought they could move me to this new school. It was called the Stony Brook Girls School. And so I went, but I had mononucleosis. I had a terrible episode with mononucleosis. I was put in the quarantine, the infirmary, for the first 8 weeks of school. And so I couldn't interact, and which may have saved me. But I wasn't normal. I mean, that was clearly not a normal situation, and being Billy Graham's daughter was not a help. It was a hindrance. And I had to rely on the Lord. I had to really lean on Him for those days that were so difficult for me. Plus, it was a much higher scholastic school than I had been used to. So I was studying really hard. Did Mom and Dad know that you were struggling like that? I think so. I begged them every day to come home. Right. And they said no.
But did they know that you were like, I mean, I have a friend whose mother, his sister called from college and said, Mom, I can't do this. I'm so afraid and everything else. And her mother is Asian. She had escaped communist Korea, so she's no nonsense, and she said, yes, you can study, and hung up the phone. What were Mom and Dad like when you called? And well, they took me there and they flew to Europe, so I couldn't call, and they put someone else in charge of me and said, make sure she's okay, take care of her. And can I ask, what was that? I mean, I'm sorry I can't relate to the whole boarding school thing. That had to have added to the there's one thing about Dad being gone because he's working all the time. It's another like, but maybe it's just the culture that, I mean, maybe it's just, I mean, I don't understand it, but I would think if my folks said, oh, and you guys are all going to a school, I'd be like, do you?
Well, Mother grew up in that culture because she was of Chinese missionaries. And so they sent their children off to boarding school.
So it was normal in the family.
And for her family. Daddy, of course, went to public school. And I think Mother was a little concerned that the schools in that part of North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina, would not be the kind of schools that she wanted us to study in.
Okay.
Franklin and Ann did, however.
They stayed.
They went off to boarding school. Franklin was kicked out, and so they put him in the public school.
When I did the thing in Washington, D.C., my kids just remember it as, and I love this, that day Dad did that big speech. That's all they really remember. They remember the people, and they remember, it's funny because I talked to Rafe the other day. He remembers the bulletproof vest. And he just asked me, he's 9, and he just asked me, Daddy, why did you wear that all the time? And what are the things? I mean, you met Martin Luther King, and
no, I didn't meet him.
You didn't meet him?
No, I didn't meet him, but I knew of my father's friendship with him.
Who were the people that came into your life, and what are the things you have flash memories of? Any?
It was interesting that the people who came to the house, because we didn't travel with Daddy, we stayed home. Mother and Daddy tried to give us that sort of normal life, and we didn't travel with him. But when people would come to the home, whether it be Vice President Nixon, although they sent me away for that day because I was little. But somebody like, there was a big opera singer, and I won't mention his name, but he was just rude. He was rude to the kids. He could have cared less. We were annoying him. And then we picked that up. But then you had people like Gary Player or Paul Harvey. And they were so warm and so welcome. They made us feel like they were their best friends. And that really made an impact on me. That, you know, even the little people in the room need attention because we don't know who those little people are going to be.
I remember 5 years ago, your father asked me some very pointed questions. And somebody in the room said, well, just a reminder, he's Mormon. And your father turned to the individual and said, I know. And he looked back at me and he said, we were talking about a certain subject, and he said, tell me how you know that came from Christ. And I told him, and he looked back to the other individual and he said, he sure sounds Christian to me. How do we get people to play nice with each other?
Oh, Glenn, I don't know. I don't know. We have such division. We have such rancor, not only in our political world, but in our Christian world, our religious world. And I know that that breaks Jesus' heart. I think for me to try to live as best as I can, as following Jesus and loving people. Now, I have I'll be honest, I have an advantage. I have the temperament that's not a warrior. I'm not a warrior. I'm much more of a lover. And I just love people. And I don't want to draw lines. I want to include people. And if in that inclusion I gather in some black sheep, well and good. But I'd rather err on the side of grace than I would on judgment. I just am not going to stand in judgment on other people.
I spent one afternoon with your dad. That's it.
But he remembers it so well, and he remembers it fondly, and he certainly thinks so much of you.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't want to give the impression that, you know, to anybody that we're, you know, we're buddies. But just like when your dad was waiting for you with open arms, there are moments in everybody's lives that fundamentally change them. And I've had a couple of them, and one of them was with your dad. And it came in two pieces. One was when he looked me in the eye and said, I've been where you are now, where the Lord is telling me to do things that I don't quite know what he means or how to do it. But I did it, and I did my best. And I'll never forget the clarity in his eyes. And he said, and because of that, I do not fear death. Not a lot of people, when it comes down to it, can say that.
It's true.
You say you're not a warrior, but the second thing that I got from him was when he told that to me, we were sitting closer than you and I were, and he was holding my hand. And he straightened up. And I saw the warrior in him. It was a peaceful warrior, but it was a warrior. It was a warrior that would turn over the tables. How do you turn tables over and not be divisive? How do you speak the truth and not be divisive?
As you ask that, it's how we speak the truth. Do we speak it in arrogance? Do we speak it in judgment? Do we speak it in gentleness and love? How did Jesus speak the truth? Now, with the Pharisees, he was ruthless. He did not like those religious, fanatics that were so judgmental and so self-righteous. And we look at a lot of sins in the world and we rank them. And I don't know which we rank worse, but I think God would rank self-righteousness and pride probably as worse. And we are full of it. And we condemn each other from our own arrogance. And that's not the way we do it. We've got to speak the truth, as Jesus says, in love. And Jesus could be hard, but there was something winsome about him. There wasn't a hard edge to him. He didn't have... You look at the encounters. I did a book a number of years ago, Fear Not Tomorrow, God is Already There. And I looked over Jesus' shoulder in the Gospels. How did he treat people? And it really was remarkable for me to see how he treated the woman at the well. How did he treat the woman taken in adultery? How did he treat the boatload of scared disciples? Not with criticism, not with harshness, not with judgment. He met them where they were, and he loved them to the next step. And I think we have to accept people where they are and love them to the next step.
I want to just talk about your father. When I met with him, your father said to me, I have one more message. He was so concerned about the country. And I saw his final message, and was that it? Was that the message, do you think?
I think it was contained within what you saw.
Yeah. Is he content that he finished his work?
Glenn, when I was with him last time, he seemed troubled. I don't know why he won't communicate why. But certainly no man has done more for the cause of Christ in this modern age. Mm-mm. And I can't think of anyone else who could say, oh, but he could have done something else. He has given his life, his all. And when Mother died, we all went to the house to sort of go sort through things and to sort of put labels on what the things that we wanted. And we got to Daddy's room, and my older sister Ann and I were standing there, and we looked around his room, and there wasn't anything we wanted. There's not anything of earthly value there. Maybe there's some sentimental things, great-grandchildren pictures, things like that. And my sister looked at me and she said, the man of God doesn't care about the things of the world. And I thought, you know, that is so right. And I hope that will be said of me at some point, that the worldly things were not what was important. It was the gospel of Jesus Christ. My father gave his life for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that will be his legacy. Change lives.
Did it affect him that people, I mean, he's one of the most loving people I've met. Not judgmental. But boy, that's not what the world thinks of. I read a poll just recently. Gosh, it was like 40% or 30% of America says bigot, hateful. And I'm like, where are you getting that? Did that hurt him? Did it hurt you more?
I think it hurt me more because Daddy didn't have that kind of spirit. He did not have, this is a funny little story, but when we were children, we were making fun of the devil. And Daddy stopped and said, don't make fun of the devil, he's a good devil. So, Daddy never said anything ugly about anybody. Never heard him criticize, even the people who wounded him deeply. He never criticized them, or I never heard it. And that's quite a legacy for me, to not be so critical. And he just loved people. And my father, I don't know whether it was, is it Erickson, the psychologist that had the stages of man, and the last stage is the universal man. My father is a universal man. He doesn't think nationally, he thinks globally. And he certainly loves this country, but he thinks globally. And when he prays at night, he prays for the world. And what an example, what an example.
Dad's in the hospital, right?
No, he's home.
Now.
He's home, and he
now.
will stay home.
I knew I had a changed heart when a man who I loved dearly, Gordon B. Hinckley, you know of him, wonderful man, kind, reminds me in many ways of your father, kind. When he died, I was supposed to meet him that Saturday. He died on a Wednesday, and he was my hero. I just loved him. And my daughter walked into my room and she said, Dad, Gordon B. Hinckley just died. And I called the family in and we talked about him and we prayed. And I knew I was changed when in my prayer I was celebrating that he was back home. He was returning with honor. He was with his wife who he loved so much. And it's almost as I could hear the celebration. When you and the family have gone now and seen your dad, and every time you must leave thinking
might be the last time.
Might be the last time. Do you find yourself, in a way, excited for him?
I do. I really do. And I sense that there's a crowd gathering at the gate. And Mother's leading the charge. And my daughter, Windsor, said to me, she said, Mom, wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall when Daddy Bill gets to heaven. And I thought, well, I hope there are no flies in heaven. But surely there aren't. But I said, honey, I don't think it's going to be any different. I think it's going to be two friends greeting each other who've known each other for years. Because Daddy has walked with Jesus for years. And it will be very comfortable. It'll be a warrior returning to his king, laying down all the victories, all the crowns and so forth, laying them at his feet and just saying, you know, he wants to hear, well done, and he will.
I love you.
Thank you, thank you.
I think you are a remarkable woman, and I wish I would have met your mother, because the couple that made you, it was a remarkable team.
Well, I think they're remarkable, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Ruth.
When we get started, would you mind leading us all in prayer?
Oh,
before
I
we
thank
start?
you. Yes, I'd love to.
Father, we thank you for this day. We know that you have ordained this time. We have looked forward to it. And now we ask that your presence would be very real and that you would bless our conversation, that it might be used in the lives of other people, Lord, and they would be blessed. Bless this home. Bless the work that's done from this home. Father, we thank you for Glenn and for Tanya and for all they're trying to accomplish, not only for your kingdom, but for America. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.